Welcome to my channel. Subscribe to the channel and listen to my stories every day. The day it all began, everything seemed perfectly ordinary. I woke up in our neatly organized suburban home, the kind that looks like it belongs in a family TV show. Molly, my wife of 14 years, was already downstairs, preparing breakfast for our 2 kids. Emma, our teenage daughter, was glued to her phone, while Daniel, our youngest, sat at the table reading a comic book. It was a typical morning, and I had no idea that life as I knew it was about to unravel. Molly and I had met in college. She was studying accounting, and I was working toward a degree in architecture. We fell for each other quickly, drawn together by a mutual passion for building a future that was both exciting and stable. She was the kind of woman who lit up a room, blonde, fit, full of life. Her laugh was contagious, and she had this way of making everyone around her feel at ease. It was that charm that drew me in. By the time we got married, I thought I had hit the jackpot. We built a life that seemed enviable by anyone's standards. We both worked good jobs, Molly as a chartered accountant and me as an architect for a well-known firm. We had our dream home, 2 beautiful kids, and a social circle that kept us busy with weekend gatherings and barbecues. We were the couple everyone else wanted to be. But things weren't perfect. They never are they? In hindsight, I can see it clearly, the signs that something was off. Molly had always been sociable, but over the past few months, her social calendar had become packed with events I wasn't invited to. Just work stuff, she would say, flashing me that smile that used to make me forget any doubts. Her phone became her constant companion, even more than usual, and I found her laughing at texts late at night when she thought I was asleep. I tried to ignore it. I didn't want to be that guy, the suspicious husband who rummages through his wife's things and jumps to conclusions. We had always trusted each other. Or at least, I had always trusted her. So, I let it go. After all, we were happy, right? We had everything we needed. Or so I thought. The turning point came on a Saturday night at a party hosted by our friend Dave. He was celebrating his promotion, and it was the kind of gathering Molly and I usually enjoyed together. As soon as we arrived, she disappeared into the crowd, like always, chatting with everyone, laughing and mingling. I grabbed a drink and tried to enjoy myself, but something was nagging at me. An hour passed, and I realized I hadn't seen Molly in a while. She wasn't the type to abandon me at a party, but lately, she seemed to have less and less interest in spending time together at these events. I wandered through the crowd, chatting with friends, but always keeping an eye out for her. That's when I saw her, off to the side, standing with a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, dark-haired, and dressed like he'd just stepped out of a high-end fashion catalog. They were deep in conversation, standing too close, laughing a little too hard. It sent a chill down my spine, though I didn't understand why. I walked over, trying to play it cool. When I approached, she didn't introduce me like she normally would. Instead, she gave me a brief smile, barely acknowledging my presence, before returning to her conversation. The guy didn't even glance my way. I stood there awkwardly for a moment before making an excuse to leave. The rest of the evening felt like a blur. I couldn't shake the image of Molly with that guy, her smile a little too wide, her body language too familiar. Still, I told myself I was being ridiculous. Maybe he was a colleague. Maybe they were just talking about work. But the gnawing doubt wouldn't leave me. When we got home that night, I tried to bring it up. "Who was that guy you were talking to?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "Oh, just someone from work," she said, brushing it off like it was nothing. "Why? Jealous?" I laughed, but it felt forced. "No, just curious. I hadn't seen him before." "Don't worry about it," she said with a dismissive wave. "He's nobody important." But I didn't stop worrying. In the days that followed, the distance between us grew. Molly started spending more time away from home, late nights at the office, weekend trips with her friends. It wasn't long before I began to suspect that something was happening, something she wasn't telling me. One evening, about a week after the party, I caught her texting late at night. She didn't realize I was awake. I rolled over in bed and saw the glow of her phone as she typed furiously, smiling at the screen. When she noticed me stirring, she quickly put the phone down and turned off the light. That was the moment I knew. For the next few days, I wrestled with my suspicions, trying to decide if I should confront her. I didn't want to believe that my wife, the woman I had loved for so long, the mother of my children, could betray me. But the signs were all there, and I couldn't ignore them any longer. Finally, one evening, when she told me she was going to meet up with some friends after work, I decided to follow her. I wasn't proud of it, but I needed answers. I waited until she left, then grabbed my keys and followed her car. She didn't go to the restaurant she had mentioned. Instead, she drove to a hotel on the other side of town. I parked across the street, my heart pounding in my chest, and watched as she stepped out of the car, glancing around nervously. A few moments later, the same guy from the party, Nick, appeared. They exchanged a brief hug, and then, hand in hand, they walked into the hotel together. I sat there in my car, frozen, as the reality of what I had just witnessed hit me. My wife was cheating on me. I felt a strange mix of emotions, rage, disbelief, sadness, but mostly, I felt numb. The woman I had built my life with had betrayed me, and there was no going back from this. I drove home in a daze, trying to figure out what to do next. Part of me wanted to confront her, to scream at her, to demand answers. But another part of me wanted to make her feel the same pain I was feeling. I wanted revenge. When she came home later that night, I pretended to be asleep. I couldn't look at her, couldn't even speak. The betrayal was too fresh, too raw. But in the silence of the night, I began to formulate a plan. This wasn't going to end with me as the victim. No, I would make sure she regretted every moment she had spent with him. She wouldn't see it coming, but when it happened, she'd know exactly what it felt like to have your world ripped apart. I didn't confront her the next day. Or the day after that. Instead, I started preparing. I had time to figure out exactly how I wanted to play this. I was patient, methodical. I began gathering evidence, checking her phone when she wasn't looking, reading her emails, piecing together the timeline of her affair. Every piece of information I found only fueled my anger, but I kept my cool. This had to be done right. As the days passed, I crafted my revenge carefully. She wouldn't know what hit her. And when it was over, she would never be able to recover from the damage I was about to cause. The days after discovering Molly's affair were a blur. I went through the motions of daily life, waking up, getting the kids ready for school, heading to work, but inside, I was a storm of rage, confusion, and hurt. Every time I looked at her, I had to fight back the urge to explode. But I held it in. I had a plan, and it needed time to come together. Molly, of course, acted like nothing was wrong. She smiled over breakfast, kissed me on the cheek before leaving for work, and even sat down with me in the evenings as if everything in our life was perfectly normal. But I knew the truth now. Every smile, every touch, every moment of affection was tainted by her betrayal. I started sleeping less, staying up late in my home office, thinking through every detail of how I was going to expose her. I couldn't just confront her. That would be too easy. No, she needed to experience the same humiliation and pain she had inflicted on me. It wasn't enough for me to end the marriage, I needed her to feel every ounce of shame, to lose everything she had built with me. I was methodical about it. I started small, testing the waters. I went through her social media, her emails, and even our joint bank account. I noticed small transfers here and there, payments for dinners, hotels, little luxuries she never mentioned to me. It was all starting to make sense now. The late nights at work, the trips she claimed were with her friends, it was all for him. The anger gnawed at me, but I didn't let it cloud my judgment. I kept digging, finding more evidence, piecing together a timeline of her affair. I didn't know exactly when it had started, but I knew it had been going on for months. The realization that I had been living in the dark for so long made me feel like a fool, but that just fueled my need for revenge. One evening, Molly came home late again. She gave me the same old excuse about having drinks with coworkers. I played along, pretending not to care. But as soon as she went upstairs to shower, I grabbed her phone and scrolled through her messages. There it was, another text from Nick. I didn't need to read it to know what it said. Their conversations were always the same, flirty, intimate, full of inside jokes that made my stomach turn. But instead of feeling crushed, I felt a strange sense of relief. Each piece of evidence I gathered felt like another brick in the wall I was building around myself, a wall that would protect me from the wreckage of our marriage. The more I knew, the easier it became to distance myself from her, to see her not as my wife but as someone who had betrayed me in the worst possible way. I wasn't the kind of man to make rash decisions, and I knew that confronting her right away would only give her a chance to explain, to twist the situation in her favor. I couldn't let her control the narrative. I had to be the one in control. So I stayed quiet, pretending I didn't know a thing, while I carefully laid the groundwork for what was coming. At work, I was more focused than ever. I threw myself into my projects, using the long hours as an excuse to avoid Molly as much as possible. I needed space to think, to plan. My colleagues noticed that I was quieter than usual, but they chalked it up to stress. No one knew what was really going on beneath the surface. One afternoon, I decided to take my plan to the next level. I called a lawyer, someone I knew through a friend who specialized in divorce cases. I didn't tell him everything, just enough to get a sense of what my options were. We discussed the logistics of splitting assets, custody of the kids, and what it would look like if I initiated divorce proceedings. It was a sobering conversation, but it gave me clarity. I needed to prepare for every possible outcome, to protect myself and the kids from the fallout that was bound to come. But the divorce wasn't enough. Molly needed to face public consequences for her actions. That's when the idea hit me, her workplace. She worked in a respected accounting firm, and her reputation there was everything. I knew if word got out about her affair, it would destroy not only our marriage but also her professional life. And that's exactly what I wanted. I began collecting every incriminating text message, every email, every bank statement that showed she had been spending money on Nick. I gathered it all into a neat little folder, a dossier of her betrayal. Once I had enough, I made an anonymous email account and sent it all to her boss. I imagined the look on her face when she would find out. The horror, the shame, the disbelief. It was a small comfort to know that her perfect little world was about to come crashing down. But I wasn't done yet. There was still more to do. The next weekend, we were invited to another party. This time, it was a company event for Molly's firm. She insisted I come with her, and I agreed, knowing it would give me the perfect opportunity to set the next part of my plan in motion. As we mingled with her colleagues, I played the doting husband, smiling and making small talk, while watching her every move. I noticed the way she gravitated toward Nick, how they exchanged glances when they thought no one was looking. But I was watching. Toward the end of the night, I slipped away and found her boss. I introduced myself, and after some polite conversation, I casually mentioned that Molly had been working late a lot lately. It must be tough balancing work and home life with all those late-night meetings, I said, letting the words hang in the air. Her boss looked puzzled. Late-night meetings? I didn't realize Molly had been putting in so many extra hours, he said. I shrugged. Yeah, she's been really dedicated. Sometimes she doesn't get home until well past midnight. His expression changed, and I could see the doubt start to creep in. I didn't need to say anything more. I had planted the seed, and I knew it would grow. As the night went on, I watched Molly closely. She was laughing with her colleagues, oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. I felt a strange satisfaction, knowing that her lies were about to catch up with her. It was only a matter of time before everything unraveled. When we got home that night, Molly kissed me goodnight and went to bed, completely unaware of the trap I had set for her. I stayed up late, savoring the feeling of power, knowing that soon, she would face the consequences of her actions. This wasn't just about getting even, it was about taking control, about making sure she understood just how deeply she had hurt me. The next morning, everything seemed normal. Molly went about her usual routine, getting ready for work, chatting with the kids, acting as if nothing had changed. But I knew better. The wheels were already in motion, and soon, there would be no turning back. I watched her leave for work, and as the door closed behind her, I smiled. She had no idea what was coming. The morning after the company party, I woke up feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Molly left for work without any suspicion, and I knew it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down on her. She had no idea what was waiting for her at the office, no idea that the evidence of her affair was sitting in her boss's inbox, ready to detonate her carefully constructed life. I spent the day at work, but my mind wasn't on the blueprints and deadlines in front of me. All I could think about was how Molly would react when the truth finally came out. I imagined the look on her face when her boss called her into his office, when he showed her the damning emails and texts. I imagined the panic in her eyes as she tried to explain it all away, the realization that she couldn't escape what she had done. It was satisfying in a way I hadn't expected. I had spent so long feeling powerless, like a fool for not seeing the signs earlier. But now, I was in control. I was the one pulling the strings, and she was the one who had to face the consequences. Around noon, I received a text from her. "Molly, hey babe, how's your day going?" I stared at the screen for a moment before replying, keeping up the act. "Me, good. Busy, but good. You?" She responded almost immediately. "Molly, same here. Meetings all morning. Can't wait to get home and relax." I smirked at the irony. Relax? Not likely. I didn't hear from her for the rest of the day, and that only made me more certain that the bomb had dropped. I pictured her sitting in her boss's office, trying to come up with excuses, spinning lies to cover up her tracks. But there was no covering this up. I had made sure of that. When I got home that evening, Molly was already there, sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of wine in front of her. She looked tense, her smile tight when she greeted me. "Hey," she said, her voice a little too casual. "How was your day?" "Good," I replied, setting my keys down. "Busy, but productive." She nodded, sipping her wine. "Yeah, same here." I could tell something was off. Her usual confidence was gone, replaced by a nervous energy that she was trying, and failing, to hide. I sat down across from her, studying her carefully. "You okay? You seem a little off." She hesitated, her eyes flickering away from mine for just a moment. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just, work stuff." There it was, her first crack. She was lying to me again, but now I knew exactly what was behind it. I could feel the power shifting, the control tipping in my favor. But I didn't push her. "Not yet. Anything you want to talk about?" I asked, keeping my tone light. She shook her head quickly. "No, no. It's just been a long day. I'm fine." I let it drop, pretending to accept her answer. We had dinner together with the kids, and for a moment, everything seemed almost normal. But I could feel the tension radiating off her, and I knew that her mind was elsewhere. Later that night, after the kids were in bed, Molly came into the living room where I was watching TV. She stood in the doorway for a moment, like she was trying to decide whether or not to say something. I muted the TV and looked at her. "What's up?" I asked. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again. She seemed to be struggling, and I could almost see the wheels turning in her head, trying to figure out how to navigate whatever had happened at work that day. Mark, she began slowly, walking over and sitting down next to me. There's something I need to talk to you about. Here it was. The moment I'd been waiting for. I kept my expression neutral, though inside, my heart was racing. Okay, I said, leaning back in my seat. What is it? She fidgeted with her hands, her eyes darting around the room. Something happened at work today. It was really weird. I raised an eyebrow, playing dumb. Weird how? Molly hesitated again, then took a deep breath. My boss, he called me into his office today. He got an anonymous email with some things in it. My stomach twisted in satisfaction. What kind of things? She swallowed hard, her face pale. Personal things. About me. About Nick. She said his name like it was a dirty word, and I had to fight to keep the smile off my face. What about Nick? I asked, my tone carefully controlled. She looked at me, her eyes wide and pleading. Mark, I swear, it's not what it looks like. I don't know who sent that email, but they're trying to ruin my career. They're trying to make me look bad. I tilted my head, pretending to be confused. What did the email say, Molly? She closed her eyes for a moment, as if trying to gather her strength. It said that I've been having an affair with Nick. That I've been lying about work trips, using company money to spend time with him. And is it true? I asked, my voice calm but firm. She looked at me, panic flashing in her eyes. No, of course not. I mean, yes, I've been spending time with him, but it's not what they're saying. It's not like that. Not like that? I repeated, my patience wearing thin. You've been sneaking around with him for months, Molly. I've seen the texts. I've seen the emails. Don't lie to me. Her face went pale, her hands trembling. Mark, Don't, I interrupted, my voice hardening. I know everything. I know about the hotel. I know about the dinners, the late nights. I know what you've been doing. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. How did you? How do you think? I snapped, finally letting my anger surface. You think I'm an idiot? You think I haven't noticed the way you've been acting? The way you've been lying to me, to our kids? Tears welled up in her eyes, and she reached for my hand. Mark, please. It's not what you think. I never meant for it to go this far. I pulled my hand away, standing up and glaring down at her. It doesn't matter what you meant. You betrayed me, Molly. You lied to me over and over again, and now you're going to face the consequences. She sobbed, burying her face in her hands. Please, Mark. Please don't do this. I love you. I didn't want to hurt you. I laughed bitterly. Too late for that. For a moment, the only sound in the room was her quiet sobbing. I watched her, feeling a strange sense of detachment. The woman in front of me was no longer the Molly I had fallen in love with. She was someone else, someone I didn't recognize, someone who had destroyed everything we had built together. When she finally looked up at me, her face streaked with tears, I felt nothing but cold satisfaction. I'm filing for divorce, I said, my voice steady. You're going to pack your things and leave. I don't care where you go, but you're not staying here. Her eyes widened in shock. Mark, no. Please. I'll do anything. I'll quit my job, I'll never see Nick again, I'll do whatever it takes. Just please don't leave me. I shook my head. It's over, Molly. You made your choice. She collapsed onto the couch, sobbing uncontrollably. But I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel sympathy. All I felt was relief. This was the moment I had been waiting for, and it felt even better than I had imagined. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her alone with her tears. I didn't sleep that night, not after what had happened. Molly's sobs echoed through the house, muffled through the walls as she lay in the guest room where I had banished her after our conversation. But I wasn't moved. In my mind, the woman I had married was long gone. What was left was someone I could barely stand to look at, someone who had taken everything we had built together and thrown it away for a fling with Nick. Divorce. That was the only way forward. I had already contacted my lawyer and set the wheels in motion. Molly was out of my life now, no longer my wife, no longer the mother of our children in any meaningful sense. She had betrayed us, and she deserved whatever came next. I got up early the next morning, leaving Molly in her room and the kids still sleeping. I needed to clear my head, to think about what life was going to look like now. I drove to the nearby park and sat on a bench overlooking the lake. The stillness of the water contrasted sharply with the turmoil inside me, but I welcomed the quiet. I needed a moment to collect myself, to plan my next steps. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from my lawyer. "Lawyer, good news, Mark. I've started the process. The paperwork will be ready by the end of the week. Let me know when you want to move forward with serving her." I stared at the message for a long time. Serving her, the thought felt cold, but it was the only option. She had betrayed me. There was no coming back from that. I replied quickly. Thanks. I'll let you know soon." But something gnawed at me, a sliver of unease that I couldn't quite shake. For weeks, I had been plotting this moment, thinking about how satisfying it would be to throw Molly out of my life. And now that it was happening, it wasn't as sweet as I thought it would be. I expected to feel triumphant, to bask in the justice I had served. Instead, I felt hollow. A light mist started to form over the lake as the sun began to rise. I should have felt a sense of clarity, but all I had was a lingering doubt. What was really bothering me? Was it the idea of moving on? Was I second-guessing my decision? No, that wasn't it. It was something else. Something off. I got up, shaking my head, and decided to head home. The house was quiet when I arrived, the kids still upstairs, likely enjoying the rare opportunity to sleep in. Molly was nowhere to be seen. I went into the kitchen, made myself a cup of coffee, and sat down at the table, trying to push away the nagging thoughts that had followed me from the park. I was halfway through my coffee when Molly walked in. She looked terrible, her eyes red and puffy, her hair a mess. She had obviously spent the night crying, but there was something else in her expression, something almost resolved. "Mark," she said softly, standing in the doorway. I didn't respond, just looked at her, waiting for whatever she had to say. She took a deep breath and stepped into the kitchen. "I know you've already made up your mind, but there's something you need to hear. Something I haven't told you." I raised an eyebrow. "More lies?" She shook her head, her eyes filled with a sadness that almost made me uncomfortable. "No. It's the truth. It's everything." I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms across my chest. "Go on, then." Molly sat down across from me, her hands trembling slightly as she began to speak. "This thing with Nick, it's not what you think. Yes, I've been spending time with him, and yes, I've been distant. But it's not because I'm in love with him or because I wanted to hurt you." "Then what was it?" I demanded, my voice sharper than I intended. "You've been sneaking around, lying to me, lying to the kids. What could possibly justify that?" She hesitated, biting her lip as tears welled up in her eyes again. "I was diagnosed with breast cancer 3 months ago." The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the breath out of me. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I just stared at her, my mind scrambling to make sense of what she had just said. I didn't know how to tell you, she continued, her voice breaking. I was terrified, Mark. I didn't want to admit it to myself, let alone tell you or the kids. So I confided in Nick. He's been through it with his sister, and he was someone I could talk to who wouldn't judge me or look at me like I was fragile. It was a mistake, but I didn't know what else to do. I sat there in stunned silence, the rage and anger that had fueled me for so long now dissipating into confusion and guilt. She wasn't lying. I could see it in her eyes, the raw, desperate truth. I never meant for it to go this far, she sobbed. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to burden you. You've always been the strong one, and I didn't want you to see me as weak. I stood up abruptly, pacing the room as my thoughts raced. Cancer. I hadn't seen this coming. Not even in my darkest moments did I imagine this. It explained so much, her distance, her secrecy, even the way she had clung to Nick as some kind of emotional lifeline. But it didn't erase the betrayal. Or did it? Molly, I said slowly, turning to face her. Why didn't you just tell me? I could have been there for you. I would have helped you through it. Instead, you pushed me away and turned to someone else. I know, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. And I'll never forgive myself for it. I didn't know how to handle it. I thought if I could just deal with it on my own, maybe it would go away. But it hasn't. For the first time in weeks, I felt the walls I had built around myself begin to crumble. The image of Molly as a heartless cheater shattered in the face of the truth. She wasn't the villain I had painted her to be. She was scared, broken, and hiding behind a mistake. I sat back down, running a hand through my hair as the weight of it all settled over me. The anger was still there, but it was mixed with something else now, something softer, something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time. I don't know what to say, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. She reached across the table, her hand trembling as she took mine. I don't expect you to forgive me, Mark. I know I messed up. I just wanted you to know the truth before it's too late. We sat there in silence for a long time, her hand in mine, both of us trying to make sense of everything that had happened. The life we had built was in ruins, but for the first time, I wasn't sure I wanted to walk away. Are you going to be okay? I asked, finally breaking the silence. Molly looked down at our hands, then back up at me. I don't know. I'm starting treatment next week. A lump formed in my throat, and I swallowed hard. I wasn't ready to lose her. Not like this. I had spent weeks planning my revenge, thinking I would feel victorious when I destroyed her life. But now, sitting here with her, I realized that all of it had been built on a lie, my own misconceptions, my own blindness to the truth. Molly wasn't the enemy. The enemy was something far darker, far more insidious, and it was already tearing our lives apart. Maybe we could find a way back from this. Maybe it wasn't too late.